Lieutenant Jake Morrison checked his chronometer for the third time in 5 minutes, silently cursing whoever thought mandatory medical screenings were best scheduled during peak duty rotations. The corridors of the Eskeipius stretched out like the gleaming arteries of some enormous mechanical beast, humming with the steady pulse of a ship designed solely for the healing and upkeep of the galaxy's countless species. Each step Jake took seemed to land in a slightly different world. The floor panels beneath him thrummed as he passed from the human-compatible zone into a section meant for Zephyrians, where gravity dipped just enough to make him feel like he was walking on springs. Further along, the air grew sharper, tinged, with the mint and ozone scent drifting from the Rigelian therapeutic pools. He wrinkled his nose. "Smells like someone bottled a thunderstorm and added toothpaste," he muttered. 8 months stationed aboard the Eskeipius, and he still found himself taking wrong turns, especially in the alien sections where signs curved into scripts he couldn't read. The interspecies medical frigate was a marvel, sure, but it also felt like someone had taken a dozen different hospital designs, thrown them into a blender, and hoped for the best. By the time Jake found Medical Bay 7, he was already rehearsing his complaint about the scheduling officer. "Next," called a voice, smooth and melodic, from behind the treatment room door. Jake stepped inside and stopped short. Nurse Lyra Kethal was standing by a console, her violet-tinged skin reflecting the sterile white light of the medical bay like polished stone. Her long, slender fingers flicked through holographic screens with practiced ease, her ears elegant, elongated, and twitching slightly were the only sign she was aware of his presence. She glanced up briefly, and her silver-flecked eyes caught the light in a way that almost made him forget to breathe. "Lieutenant Morrison," she said, her voice carrying the faint lilt of someone who had been awake far too long but refused to show it. "Monthly screening. Standard immunization updates." She blinked and rubbed her eyes. And ... What was the third item? "Reflexology assessment," Jake offered. "Though I'm not sure what that involves, and I'm slightly afraid to ask." "It involves me hitting your knee with a small hammer and pretending to be surprised when your leg kicks," Lyra replied, finally meeting his gaze. Medical science at its finest. Jake chuckled, lowering himself onto the examination table. "I feel reassured already." Lyra gave a faint, amused snort as she selected a sleek injector from the tray and double-checked its contents against her tablet. The room was typical Alliance-issue white walls, gleaming surfaces, and enough monitoring equipment to track the vitals of a small army. As Lyra approached, Jake tried filling the silence. "Busy week?" "You could say that," she replied. 17 emergency cases from the Kepler station outbreak, 6 food poisoning incidents from the mess hall's experimental Fusion Friday menu, and 1 Rigelian engineer who thought he could recalibrate artificial gravity with a wrench. Did it work? Let's just say the engineering deck became a zero-gravity dance floor for 3 hours. She pressed the injector against his arm. "Standard immunization booster. You might feel a slight pinch." "I've had worse," Jake said, rolling up his sleeve. "Before they let me on an interspecies vessel, I had to get 40 shots. Pretty sure my arm turned into a pincushion." The injector hissed softly, and Jake felt the cool spread of the Kia. "Serum." He barely had time to crack a joke before noticing that Lyra had gone completely still. Her violet complexion paled, her silver-flecked eyes wide with horror. Slowly, she lowered the injector, staring at it as if it had grown fangs. Nurse?" Jake sat up, concern replacing his easy grin. "What's wrong?" Lyra's voice was barely a whisper. That wasn't meant for you." Jake blinked. "What do you mean it wasn't meant for me?" "It's my appointment. I'm the one sitting here with my sleeve rolled up." Lyra set the injector on the tray with trembling hands, then crossed the room with quick, deliberate steps. There was a soft beep as she activated the door's lock. When she turned back to him, her expression was fierce, her voice low and sharp. "No one can know." Jake's mouth went dry. "Okay," he said slowly. "You're officially scaring me now." She grabbed a scanner and began frantically calibrating it, her hands moving faster than he'd ever seen. "What I just injected you with," she said, her voice trembling despite her efforts to stay calm, "isn't designed for human physiology. It's a Vilian regenerative serum. Experimental. Highly classified. Completely untested on humans." Strange tingling began to ripple through Jake's veins, spreading outward from the injection site like carbonated water fizzing under his skin. "Define untested," he said, his voice tight. "As in, we have no idea what happens next?" Lyra's eyes flashed, a mixture of fear and determination. "Exactly that. We need to monitor you, now." The tingling intensified, and Jake's vision sharpened unnaturally, as though the sterile white room had suddenly come into impossibly crisp focus. He glanced at Lyra, who was already scanning him, her voice dropping to a panicked murmur. "This can't be happening. I can't let anyone find out." Lieutenant Jake Morrison leaned back on the examination table, his fingers drumming on the metal surface as if trying to tap away the unsettling energy fizzing through his veins. Every nerve in his body was alive, humming with an electric sharpness that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. His senses were wrong, too sharp. He could hear the faint whirring of the ventilation system overhead, the soft hiss of pressurized med gas in the adjacent room, and even the rhythmic pulse of Lyra Kethal's heartbeat as she moved around the medical bay. Lyra was not calm. Her hands moved quickly over the console, pulling up streams of data, but there was tension in her movements, her elongated ears twitching in ways he hadn't noticed before. When she looked at him, her violet eyes carried a mixture of fear and regret that made Jake's stomach twist. "How bad is this?" he asked, watching her carefully. She paused for a fraction of a second, which was all the answer he needed. "You don't understand," she said finally, her voice low but steady. "This serum isn't meant for your species. It's not like a vaccine or a standard booster. It's alive. It's rewriting your cells as we speak. I have no idea what it's going to do to you." Jake flexed his fingers, and the sensation of the cool metal under his palm sent a shock of awareness racing up his arm. He could feel the table, not just the texture of the surface, but the subtle vibrations of the ship's systems thrumming through it. "That's new," he muttered. "What is?" Lyra's head snapped up, the tension in her body clear. "I can feel everything, like literally everything. It's like the table is talking to me." He ran his hand along the edge of the surface, eyes widening. "And I think I can tell it's made of a carbon-aluminum alloy reinforced with, that's weird, something like an organic resin?" Lyra froze mid-motion, her expression flickering between shock and fascination. "The serum is enhancing your neural pathways faster than I thought. It's not just repairing cells. It's changing your entire sensory processing system." "Jake, we need to run a full diagnostic." A loud clang from outside the bay interrupted her. Jake flinched, his hearing spiking to unnatural clarity. He could tell exactly where the sound came from 2 corridors over and even make out the voice of an engineer cursing under his breath about dropping a plasma wrench. His eyes widened. "I just heard someone on the engineering deck. I shouldn't be able to hear that." Lyra's face went pale. She moved closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "This is worse than I thought. Your brain is adapting too quickly. We need to keep this quiet, Jake. If Dr. Chun finds out, they'll put you into medical isolation, dissect every cell of your body, and—" Whoa. Jake interrupted, raising his hands. "You're saying they'll turn me into a science project? Because I don't think that's on my job description." Lyra hesitated, then took a step closer, her voice lowering even more. You don't understand. This serum is military-grade Vilian tech. It's not even supposed to exist. If they find out you've been injected, they won't just test you, they'll erase every record of what happened, including me. Jake studied her, realizing the fear in her voice wasn't just professional. She was genuinely terrified, not of losing her job, but of being erased from the ship, from the Alliance, maybe from existence. For the first time, his usual humor softened. Okay, no one finds out. We're in this together. Her eyes flicked to his, a silent gratitude passing between them. Then the console beeped sharply, displaying a string of data that made Lyra's breath catch. She stared at the readings, her lips parting. Jake, your neural activity is off. The charts. Your reflexes are spiking to nearly double normal human baseline. Your heart rate is stable, but your brain, it's running like it's on overdrive. Which means what, exactly? Jake asked, trying to sound casual even as a strange clarity settled over him. His thoughts felt faster, sharper, as if every question had a dozen answers ready to be pulled apart. It means, Lyra said, stepping back, that you might not be entirely human anymore. The words hung between them like a live wire. Jake stared at her, unsure whether to laugh, panic, or ask for a mirror to see if he'd sprouted extra eyes. Before he could respond, a new sensation rippled through his body, a wave of heat that surged from the injection site, sweeping through his chest and up into his head. He inhaled sharply, clutching the edge of the table. Jake? Lyra's voice was tense, her scanner already sweeping over him. What's happening? Describe. It's everything. I can hear the hum of the reactor 3 decks below. I can smell the disinfectant in storage bay 12. I can. He paused, blinking hard. Lyra, someone just walked past medical bay 5 carrying a crate of Regelian spices. Lyra froze. That's impossible. It's too far. Not anymore, Jake said, his voice unnervingly calm. He looked at her, his pupils dilating. Lyra, what exactly did you inject me with? Before she could answer, a soft chime sounded from the outer corridor, followed by the unmistakable voice of Dr. Sarah. Chun, Nurse Kethal, Lieutenant Morrison screening should be complete by now. I'd like to review the results. Lyra's eyes widened. She's early, she whispered. Without thinking, she grabbed Jake's wrist and yanked him off the table. Stay quiet. We can't let her see these readings. Jake tilted his head, already hearing Dr. Chun's footsteps approaching like a drumbeat. He grinned, despite the chaos swirling inside him. Guess we're about to find out how good I am at lying. Jake's grin faded as the footsteps outside the bay grew louder. He could hear Dr. Chun's steady, purposeful stride, each click of her boots like a countdown. His enhanced hearing picked up the faint rustle of her data tablet, the rapid tapping of her stylus. Every sound seemed magnified, as though the walls themselves were whispering the danger. Closing in on them, Lyra's hands trembled as she shoved the scanner under the examination table. We need a story now, she whispered, her voice sharp but hushed. If she sees the serum readings, I've got it, Jake cut in, his mind firing at a speed that startled even him. I'll say I'm part of some experimental sensory training program, classified stuff. Makes sense with the diplomatic corps, right? They always have weird projects. Lyra stared at him, horrified. That's insane. Insane is locking the door and hoping no one notices, Jake shot back. With a crooked smile. Relax, I'm good under pressure. Before Lyra could argue, Dr. Chun's voice sounded from just outside. Nurse Kethal, open this door. Lyra's breath caught. You don't understand she knows when people are lying. Then I guess we make sure she doesn't think to ask the wrong questions, Jake said with a shrug. He stepped forward. As Lyra reluctantly unlocked the door, Dr. Sarah Chun strode in, tall and severe, her uniform as crisp as her tone. "Lieutenant Morrison, why is your screening taking this long? And why is the medical bay on lockdown?" Her dark eyes flicked from Lyra to Jake like scalpels, dissecting the tension in the room. Jake gave her a confident smile, even as his pulse thundered. "Sorry for the delay, Doctor. I'm part of a classified Alliance sensory enhancement program. The immunization might have interacted with my neural modifications, so Nurse Kethal wanted to run a few extra checks." Chen's brow arched, skeptical. "Classified sensory program? Why was I not informed?" "Because it's classified," Jake replied, his tone just earnest enough to carry weight. He added, "I'm not authorized to share the details, but I can file a report through the proper channels." Dr. Chun's gaze lingered on him, assessing, probing. Jake could almost hear her thoughts, a rapid-fire evaluation of protocols and permissions. The silence stretched, but he didn't flinch. Finally, Chun's lips tightened. "Fine. Nurse Kethal, I expect a full report on any irregularities within 6 hours. No exceptions." "Yes, Doctor," Lyra said, her voice steady though her shoulders sagged with tension. Chun turned on her heel and exited, the door sliding shut behind her. The instant the footsteps faded, Lyra exhaled as if she'd been holding her breath for hours. "That," she hissed, "was the worst lie I've ever heard." Jake grinned, leaning against the table. "Maybe, but it worked." Lyra paced the room, her fingers curling and uncurling. "You don't understand how close that was. If she suspected anything, she could have pulled your medical file, checked the injection logs. Then we'd have to explain why I can now hear an engineer 2 decks below cursing at a broken plasma valve," Jake interrupted. He tilted his head, his expression shifting as if tuning in to a new frequency. "Actually, he's about to drop that wrench again. Yep, there it goes." Lyra froze. You can really hear that?" "I can hear everything," Jake said, his voice softening. He met her gaze, his tone suddenly serious. "Lyra, something is happening to me, and it's not just a boost to my senses. My brain feels like it's rewiring itself. Everything's sharper, faster." Lyra swallowed hard, her fear tempered by fascination. "The serum is designed to adapt, to build new neural pathways for survival. For Vilians, it enhances our ability to heal, to sense danger, to process information. For a human." She trailed off, shaking her head. "We don't know what it will do." Jake studied her, noting the flicker of guilt in her eyes. "You're not just scared for me. You're scared for yourself." Lyra stopped pacing. "If they find out I gave you that serum accidentally or not, I'll be finished. My career, my research, my life in the Alliance. Do you understand? Vilians have COMPLICATED laws about unauthorized cross-species experiments." Jake smirked, though his tone was softer. "So we keep this between us. Just you, me, and the wrong shot that's making me part superhero." "Superhero?" Lyra arched a brow. "You're barely stable." Jake hopped off the table, flexing his fingers. "Stable enough to tell you that something in this room is off." He moved toward the storage wall, closing his eyes as he touched one of the sealed medical containers. "These immunization supplies, there's something wrong with them. I can feel it. The molecular structure is tainted, not natural." Lyra stared at him as if he'd grown another head. "You can feel contamination?" Jake nodded, his voice certain. "It's not just random degradation. It's deliberate. Someone tampered with these batches." Lyra's blood ran cold. She grabbed her tablet and pulled up supply logs. "These containers were distributed to 14 colonies 3 weeks ago." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "That's when the Kepler outbreak started." Jake's expression hardened, all traces of humor gone. then we're not just dealing with an accident. We're dealing with sabotage. Lyra glanced toward the door as though expecting Dr. Chun to return any second. If you're right, this goes way beyond us, beyond this ship. Jake met her gaze, his voice calm but edged with steel. Then we find out who's behind it, before anyone else gets hurt. The tension between them was electric, a mix of fear, adrenaline, and something deeper neither of them dared to name. As Lyra began pulling supply manifests, Jake closed his eyes again, his sharpened senses scanning the room like a radar. He could feel every vibration, every whisper of air. And somewhere in the distance, he heard something chilling, an unfamiliar voice over a secure channel, muttering, "The contamination is working. Phase 2 begins tomorrow." Jake's eyes snapped open. "Lyra," he said, his voice low, "we're not alone in this. Someone on this ship is part of it." Jake's warning hung in the sterile air of the medical bay like a knife, sharp and undeniable. Lyra froze, her violet eyes narrowing as the words sank in. "Someone on this ship?" She repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're certain?" "Absolutely," Jake said, his tone low but steady. "I heard a voice on a secure comms channel. It wasn't a broadcast, it wasn't open chatter, it was encrypted, hidden. And I heard it like the guy was standing right next to me," he said. "The contamination is working. Phase 2 begins tomorrow." He paused, his jaw tightening. "This isn't random. Someone's planning something big." Lyra's fingers trembled slightly as she pulled up the medical storage logs on her tablet. If that's true, Phase 2 could mean more sabotage, more colonies affected. Her voice hardened, determination cutting through her fear. "We need to find out who's behind this." Jake's senses flared like a living network. He could hear the faint hum of the power relays, the whisper of ventilation shafts, the distant murmur of crew members several decks away. It was like standing in the center of a symphony that only he could hear. He turned toward the storage bay, his gaze focused. "If I concentrate, I think I can trace the voice." The comm signal had a fingerprint, a distinct rhythm in the encryption. Lyra glanced at him, her expression torn between awe and worry. "Jake, you're talking like a sensor array. Human brains aren't supposed to process that kind of data. I don't know if the serum is boosting your abilities or burning through your neural pathways." "Let's hope it's the first option," Jake said with a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Because we don't have time to wait for your research team to run diagnostics." She hesitated, then nodded. "What do you need?" "Access to the secure comms logs. I can cross-reference what I heard with encrypted channels and maybe pinpoint where the signal originated." Lyra's fingers danced across the tablet. "I can get you partial access, but anything beyond that is restricted to senior medical officers and ship security." "Then we'll have to get creative," Jake said, his grin returning faintly. "Lucky for you, creativity is my specialty." They moved quickly, keeping their conversation low as they slipped into the medical storage corridor. The cool air smelled faintly of antiseptics and ozone, and the rows of containers loomed like silent sentinels. Jake stopped near the sealed section marked 7 Alpha and placed his hand on one of the crates. His eyes closed, his breathing slowed, and for a moment he was completely still. "Jake?" Lyra asked, watching him. He didn't answer. He was somewhere else entirely, his mind stretching outward, mapping vibrations, molecular differences, and chemical scents invisible to normal senses. A prickling sensation at his fingertips told him what he needed to know. "This batch," he said finally, pointing to one of the crates, "this one's contaminated. Not just tampered with, it's been re-engineered." Lyra's face paled. As she pulled up the shipping records, "This batch is scheduled for distribution to the Auridan colonies in 2 days. If this contamination spreads there, it won't, Jake said, his voice carrying a sudden steel that surprised even him. Not if we stop it here. A sound in the corridor made them both freeze. Footsteps slow, deliberate, approaching the storage bay. Jake tilted his head, his sharpened hearing zeroing in on the intruder's pattern. Someone's coming. 2 people, security boots and, he paused, frowning. One of them is carrying a plasma cutter. Lyra's eyes widened. Security doesn't need plasma cutters, not unless... They're here to destroy the evidence, Jake finished. Grimly thinking fast, he pulled Lyra into the shadow of the shelving units just as the bay door hissed open. A tall figure stepped inside, an Alliance security officer Jake recognized by uniform, but his movements were too calculated, too predatory. Behind him, a second figure in a maintenance suit carried a plasma cutter and a data slate. Orders are to wipe this whole section, the security officer muttered. Everything from 7 Alpha down. Jake's blood ran cold. They're working for real pharmaceuticals. The realization hit him like a punch to the chest. Lyra's hand tightened on his arm. Her eyes flicked to the console near the bay's entrance. Silent suggestion that they needed evidence before they confronted anyone. Jake nodded, his mind already spinning through possibilities. His reflexes felt supercharged, his muscles tense and ready as the intruders approached the contaminated batch. Jake moved like a shadow, sliding between crates until he was within striking distance. He could hear the subtle click of the plasma cutter's ignition sequence. Without thinking, he grabbed a loose metal tray from the shelf and hurled it not at the saboteurs, but at a wall-mounted tool rack. The clang echoed like a gunshot, sending both intruders spinning around. "Who's there?" The officer barked, his hand moving to the sidearm at his belt. Jake waited for the perfect moment, counting the officer's footsteps by sound before lunging from cover. In a blur of motion, he twisted the sidearm out of the man's hand and shoved him against the crates. The speed of his reaction startled even Jake. "Wow," he muttered under his breath. "That was fast." The second saboteur swung the plasma cutter, but Jake's reflexes were already moving ahead of his thoughts. He ducked, grabbed the man's arm, and slammed the cutter against the wall, sparks erupting in a hiss of molten metal. "Careful," Jake said through gritted teeth. "You could hurt someone with that." Lyra, shaking off her shock, quickly accessed the officer's drop data slate. Her eyes widened as she scanned the screen. "Jake, look. It's a direct order from real pharmaceuticals. They've been paying off Alliance security to destroy any trace of the contamination." Jake shoved the officer back against the crates. "So you're just corporate muscle? You were willing to let thousands of colonists die so your bosses could win a contract?" The officer glared at him but said nothing. Lyra's voice cut through the tension. "We have enough evidence to expose them, but if we take this to Dr. Chun, she'll want to know how we discovered it. How do we explain your abilities?" Jake looked at her, his chest still heaving from the confrontation. "We don't. Not yet. We tell her you found irregularities during routine testing." "I'll back up your data," Lyra hesitated. "And if they ask how you stopped 2 trained saboteurs with your bare hands?" Jake smirked. "I'll just tell them I had an excellent nurse." As they dragged the saboteurs to a secure holding room, Jake felt the strange hum of energy in his veins grow stronger. His senses were expanding again, pushing past the normal boundaries of perception. He could feel the ship's power grid humming like a living organism, every pulse of current, like a heartbeat. And beneath it all, he sensed something else, an unfamiliar signal buried in the ship's comm systems, a code looping endlessly. Lyra noticed his sudden stillness. "What is it?" Jake's eyes narrowed. "The voice I heard earlier, it's not just one person. There's an entire network operating on this ship, and they're already moving to Phase 2. Dr. Chen's office door slid shut behind Jake and Lyra with a quiet hiss that felt far too final. The room was bathed in cold white light, its walls lined with holodisplays streaming medical data and security reports. Dr. Chen stood behind, her desk like a sentinel, arms crossed, her sharp gaze moving between them. "So," she said, her tone cutting like a scalpel, "you've detained 2 security personnel, accessed restricted storage logs, and filed an unauthorized incident report. Care to explain why?" Jake glanced at Lyra, whose posture was as rigid as a statue, then cleared his throat. "With all due respect, Doctor, those weren't security personnel. They were saboteurs' plants from real pharmaceuticals." "We have the data slate to prove it." Chun raised an eyebrow. "Real pharmaceuticals? That's a serious accusation." "Lieutenant." Lyra stepped forward, holding up the recovered data slate. "This slate contains encrypted orders from real executives. They've been contaminating Alliance medical supplies to destabilize competitors and manipulate the supply chain. Batch 7 Alpha was only the beginning." Chun took the slate, her fingers gliding across the surface as she skimmed the files. For the briefest moment, her expression cracked, surprise flashing in her eyes. "If this is real," she said, "we'll need to escalate to the Admiralty immediately." Jake could feel the tension radiating off Lyra as they waited. His senses were still humming, attuned to every sound in the room, the faint buzz of the holodisplays, the heartbeat of Dr. Chun, the subtle rasp of Lyra's breathing. It was overwhelming and intoxicating at the same time. "Doctor," Jake said carefully, "there's something else you need to know." Lyra shot him a sharp glance. He ignored it. "The reason we even found the contamination," he continued, "is because I picked up on things our sensors missed. I could feel the molecular inconsistencies in the batches. My senses are different now." Chun's gaze sharpened. "Different? Explain." Lyra stepped in quickly. "Lieutenant Morrison was part of an experimental cross-sensory analysis program, Doctor. The immunization triggered some unusual but temporary sensory enhancements. We were cautious and—" "Temporary?" Jake said under his breath, almost laughing. He flexed his fingers. "This doesn't feel temporary." Chun didn't look convinced. "Whatever the cause, you're both in over your heads. If Real has infiltrated Alliance operations, this isn't just a medical issue. It's espionage. And people who dig too deep into espionage tend to vanish." Jake smirked, though his gut tightened. "I don't plan on vanishing anytime soon." Later, that night, the ship's corridors were quieter, but Jake's heightened senses made silence impossible. He could hear every distant whisper, every hum of the engines, every creak of the hull. He and Lyra moved like shadows, following a trail of encrypted signals Jake had traced earlier. His brain worked faster than ever, processing data and patterns with machine-like precision. "This corridor leads to the auxiliary comms hub," Lyra whispered, glancing around nervously. "Only senior officers have clearance here." "Which makes it a perfect place to hide something shady," Jake replied. "I can hear a low-frequency signal coming from inside. Someone's piggybacking Alliance transmissions." When they reached the hub, Jake pressed his palm to the door panel, closing his eyes. The vibrations told him everything, the rhythmic pulse of a data stream, the faint crackle of static interference. "There's someone inside," he murmured. "2 people. One is typing on a console. The other is pacing." Lyra's breath caught. "Can you hear what they're saying?" "Give me a second," Jake said, focusing. The voices filtered through, faint but clear in his mind. "Phase 2 is ready. The contamination shipments leave with the next convoy. Morrison and Kethal need to be contained permanently." Jake's jaw tightened. "They're talking about us." The door slid open with a soft hiss before Lyra could stop him. The two figures inside an officer and a technician whirled around, eyes wide. Who the hell? Jake was faster. He crossed the room in 2 strides, grabbing the officer's wrist before he could draw his weapon. Bad day to be a corporate stooge, Jake said through clenched teeth, twisting the weapon away and tossing it aside. His reflexes were so sharp it felt as though time had slowed around him. The technician lunged toward the console, probably to wipe data, but Lyra was ready. She grabbed a surgical injector from her belt loaded with a sedative and jammed it into the technician's neck. The man crumpled to the floor before he could utter a word. Jake stared at her, impressed. Remind me never to annoy you. I'll add that to your file, she shot back, but her voice shook slightly. They turned to the console. Streams of encrypted data scrolled across the screen, shipment logs, sabotage orders, and coded communications. Jake's enhanced cognition parsed the patterns faster than any human brain should. This is it, he said, his voice low. Real is planning to contaminate the Aridin and Vega colonies next. Thousands of people will die if these shipments go out. Lyra's breath hitched. We need to copy everything. Take this to the Admiralty. Jake hesitated, his fingers hovering over the console. His senses flared again, warning him of something. Wait, he whispered. Someone's coming. 3? No, 4 people. Armed. Lyra's eyes widened. How do you know? Because I can hear their boots pounding down the hall and the safety clicks on their rifles. Jake grabbed her arm. We need another way out. The emergency maintenance hatch at the far end of the hub became their escape route. Crawling through the narrow, dimly lit duct, Jake's body was alive with adrenaline. Every metallic scrape, every vibration against the walls resonated through his heightened senses, guiding them like sonar. Jake, Lyra whispered behind him, her voice a tremor in the dark. What's happening to you? You're not the same person I examined this morning. He paused just long enough to glance back at her. I don't know what I'm becoming, but I know one thing: I'm not letting them win. As they reached a junction, the muffled voices of the armed team echoed behind them. Jake's senses pinpointed their location to the meter. They're splitting up, he whispered. 2 are moving toward the lower decks. 2 are heading for this duct. We need to move now. Lyra's hand brushed his arm as they crawled faster, her touch grounding him amid the chaos. We'll figure this out, she said softly, but not if we get caught. Jake didn't respond. His mind was already 10 steps ahead, calculating escape routes, potential ambush points, and worst-case scenarios. His pulse pounded, but it wasn't fear, it was focus. The serum hadn't just enhanced his senses. It was reshaping the way he thought, the way he fought. They emerged from the duct into a dim storage bay, Jake's muscles tense, every instinct screaming that they were still being hunted. Lyra sealed the hatch behind them, her chest rising and falling with quick, shallow breaths. We can't keep running forever. Jake glanced at the data chip now safely tucked into his jacket, a chip that could expose real pharmaceuticals. And its conspiracy. We won't, he said. Next time, we fight. A sudden noise from the far end of the bay, a metallic clang, made them both spin around. Jake's ears rang with the sound, every detail amplified. He heard a whisper, faint but unmistakable. End this, now. Lyra's hand hovered near her sedative injectors. Jake, stay behind me, he said, stepping forward, every sense on fire. He didn't know if this was the serum talking or just instinct, but one thing was clear. Someone was about to try and kill them. He clang echoed again through the dim storage bay, followed by the subtle scrape of boots against metal. Jake raised a hand, signaling Lyra to stay back. His senses were a storm of information, the faint metallic taste of ozone in the air, rapid heartbeat of someone hidden just beyond the stack of medical crates, the low hum of a weapon charging. Every nerve in his body pulsed like a live wire, the Vilian serum feeding his brain with too much data and yet sharpening it into perfect clarity. "Show yourself," Jake called, his voice steady but edged with steel. "Unless you want me to. Come over there and find you first." A figure stepped out of the shadows, a man in a standard Alliance security uniform, but with a coldness in his eyes that didn't belong. He held a plasma pistol steady, aimed directly at Jake's chest. "Lieutenant Morrison," the man said, his tone unnervingly calm, "you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. Hand over the data chip and walk away." Jake smirked despite. The weapon pointed at him. "See, the thing about wrong places and wrong times? I'm kind of an expert at both." His stance shifted slightly, weight balanced, every muscle ready to explode into motion. "And I'm not handing you anything." The man's finger twitched on the trigger, but Jake's world slowed. The hum of the pistol, the subtle shift of the man's stance, the almost imperceptible breath he took before squeezing. Jake saw it all in perfect detail. He moved before the shot fired, ducking low and surging forward. The plasma bolt burned the air where his head had been an instant ago. Jake slammed into the man, twisting his arm and disarming him with a fluid motion that surprised even himself. He tossed the pistol across the bay, the clatter echoing like a bell. "Guess the serum comes with perks," he muttered under his breath. But the fight wasn't over. Two more figures emerged from the far end of the bay, both armed, both moving with lethal intent. Lyra's gasp cut through the tension. "Jake!" He grabbed her wrist and pulled her behind a stack of crates just as the new attackers opened. Fire. Blue plasma bolts scorched the metal, filling the bay with the acrid smell of ionized air. "Great," Jake muttered. 3 against 1. Exactly how I wanted to spend my evening. Lyra's eyes were wide, fear and fury mixing in equal measure. "You can't fight them all alone." "Good thing I'm not alone," Jake said, grabbing a nearby metal rod from the storage rack. He handed her one of the emergency sedative injectors from her belt. "You watch my back. If anyone gets close, you put them to sleep." The attackers fanned out, trying to flank them. Jake's senses painted their movements like a map in his head, the soft scuff of boots, the faint exhale of breath, the vibration of their steps on the deck plating. He timed it perfectly. As one attacker rounded the crates, Jake moved like lightning, the metal rod flashing in a wide arc. The man dropped, stunned before he could fire. The second attacker charged, but Lyra stepped forward, injector in hand. She jabbed it into the man's neck with surprising force. He collapsed with a dull thud. "Not bad," Jake said, grinning. "You ever think about switching careers to combat training?" "I prefer not getting shot," she replied, her tone sharp but laced with adrenaline. The third attacker, the one Jake had disarmed earlier, tried to reach his weapon, but Jake was faster. He crossed the distance in a heartbeat, pinning the man against the wall. "Who sent you?" Jake demanded, his voice low and dangerous. The man sneered. "You think you're special, Morrison? You're just a liability now. Real pharmaceuticals isn't done. We're everywhere. Even your precious Alliance can't protect you." Jake's jaw tightened. He wanted to push harder, to make the man talk, but Lyra's voice cut through his anger. "Jake, we need to move. Someone else will come when these 3 don't check in." They bound the attackers with magnetic restraints and slipped out of the bay, moving quickly through the narrow service corridors. Lyra's breathing was ragged, and she kept glancing at Jake as if seeing him for the first time. "I've worked with enhanced Vilian soldiers before," she said quietly. "None of them moved like you just did." Jake glanced at her, a flicker of unease crossing his face. "I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. It's unnatural," Lyra said. "Your reflexes, your perception, it's not just enhancement, it's evolution." The serum isn't just improving you, Jake, it's changing you. He stopped mid-step, her words hitting harder than any plasma shot. Changing me how? Lyra hesitated, looking into his eyes. I don't know yet, but if we don't find a way to stabilize the effects, I'm not sure what's going to be left of you when this is over. For the first time, fear flickered across Jake's face. Not fear of the attackers or the conspiracy, they were tangible, fightable. But fear of becoming something he didn't recognize, that was harder to face. He ran a hand through his hair and forced a grin. Well, let's save the galaxy first and worry about my existential crisis later. They reached a communications relay station tucked behind the ship's primary med decks. Jake slid the data chip into the console, his fingers flying across. The controls, Lyra hovered nearby, her expression tense. If Real has compromised our security systems, they could trace this upload. Then I guess we make it quick, Jake said, his voice sharp with focus. The console blinked, streams of encrypted data flashing across the screen. Their proof of the contamination network, sabotage orders, payments to Alliance insiders. This is enough to blow Real Pharmaceuticals wide open. Lyra let out a slow breath. We did it. Jake's senses prickled suddenly, an instinctive warning. He froze, listening. Footsteps, 6 of them, no 7. All converging on their location. Not yet, he said grimly. They're coming. Lyra's hand tightened around his arm. What do we do? Jake smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. We stop running. The hatch burst open, and armed mercenaries poured in sleek armor, plasma rifles raised. Jake's mind went quiet. Every movement slowed into a dance of precision. He saw every twitch of their trigger fingers, every shift in stance. He moved like water, grabbing a fallen rifle, firing back with uncanny accuracy, his body responding faster than conscious thought. Lyra ducked behind the console, her eyes wide with shock and awe. Jake wasn't just surviving, he was dominating. It was terrifying to watch. When the last mercenary dropped, silence filled the room, broken only by Jake's sharp breathing. Lyra approached slowly. Jake, you shouldn't be able to do that. No human should. Jake turned to her, his pupils dilated, his voice low. I know. And I don't think I'm just human anymore. As they sealed the doors and prepared to send the data to Admiral Torres, Lyra reached for his hand, her violet fingers warm against his skin. We'll figure this out, together. Jake met her gaze, his grin softening into something real. You're stuck with me now. Alien super serum and all. Before Lyra could reply, the console beeped a warning tone. Someone was trying to block their transmission. Jake's senses lit up like fire. They're here, and they know we have everything. Lyra's breath caught. Then we have one shot to finish this. Good thing I don't miss anymore, Jake said, gripping the rifle. The ship felt alive around Jake Morrison, its hum resonating in his bones like a living pulse. Every vibration, every whisper of power coursing through the Eskeipius was crystal clear to him. He stood in the relay station, rifle in hand, his senses stretched to their limits. Lyra was at his side, her violet skin shimmering faintly under the emergency lights as she frantically worked the console. They're blocking our transmission, she said, her voice taut with urgency. If we can't send this data to Admiral Torres, Real Pharmaceuticals will erase every trace of what we've uncovered. Jake's mind processed a dozen strategies in seconds, his thoughts moving like a lightning storm. Then we do it old school. No data uplink, no traceable signal. He looked at her with a quick grin. We'll take it to her in person. But first, his senses flared, catching the sound of armored boots pounding down the hallway. We've got company, a lot of company. Lyra's fingers froze above the console. How many? 8, Jake said instantly, his voice low and focused. 3 with rifles, 2 with shock batons, 1 with a pulse jammer, and 2, heavier, maybe ex-military. Lyra stared at him like she wasn't sure whether to be amazed or terrified. "You're guessing, right?" Jake just smiled, though his grip tightened on the rifle. "Nope." The corridor outside exploded with shouts and the mechanical hiss of a breaching tool. Jake motioned for Lyra to stay low, then moved with impossible speed, his body responding faster than thought. When the first mercenary stepped through the hatch, Jake was already there, grabbing the man's rifle, twisting it out of his hands, and sending him crashing to the floor. Plasma bolts lit up the corridor. Jake ducked and fired, each shot precise. Calculated. His reflexes were beyond human now. He could anticipate movements before they happened, almost as if he could read the intent behind each step. "Stay behind me," he called, though Lyra was already crouched near the console, one hand clutching a sedative injector like a dagger. The pulse jammer mercenary moved in, trying to disable the relay systems, but Jake's senses caught the faint whirring of the device's activation. He spun, yanked a crate from a nearby shelf, and hurled it with bone-snapping accuracy. The jammer cracked against the floor, dead. "You're not supposed to throw medical equipment." Lyra shouted, but there was a note of awe in her voice. "Don't worry, I'll write it up as tactical improvisation," Jake shot back, slamming the butt of the rifle into another attacker's armor. The mercenary went down groaning. When the last of them fell, the corridor was silent again, smoke curling in the air. Jake wiped sweat from his forehead, his breathing ragged but controlled. Lyra stared at him like she was seeing something alien. "You're faster than them," she whispered. "Stronger. I've seen Vilian warriors, but this is something else." Jake lowered the rifle and met her gaze, the weight of what she said sinking in. "Yeah," he said quietly, "and I'm not sure how I feel about it." They didn't have time to dwell. With the mercenaries unconscious, they grabbed the data chip and made their way to the docking bay. Jake's enhanced senses swept the ship as they moved. He could hear the thrum of engines, the distant shouts of crew members, and even the faint static of encrypted comms trying to track them. Every corner, every shadow felt alive with threat. "Admiral Torres is on the Hippocrates," Lyra said, checking her tablet. "If we can reach her ship, we can hand her the evidence directly." "Then that's our next stop," Jake replied. "No more running. We finish this." The docking bay was a war zone of tension. Alliance security officers, real ones, not. Real's infiltrators had gathered to respond to the attack. Dr. Chun stood among them, her expression sharp as a blade. When she saw Jake and Lyra, her eyes narrowed. "Lieutenant Nurse Kethal," Chun said, crossing her arms. "Care to explain why I've got unconscious mercenaries in my med corridors and an unapproved data transfer pinging the Admiralty?" Jake exchanged a glance with Lyra, then stepped forward, holding out the data chip. "Because Real Pharmaceuticals has been poisoning our colonies, and we have the proof. And because if we didn't act, thousands more would be dead before anyone realized what was happening." Dr. Chun's stern expression softened slightly as she took the chip. "You'd better be right about this." "Oh, we are," Jake said, his voice firm. "Check the files. It's all their sabotage orders, payment records, everything." Chun studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Get aboard the Hippocrates. Admiral Torres will want to hear this directly." The Hippocrates was a sleek research vessel, its corridors humming with quiet precision. In the briefing room, Admiral Torres sat at the head of a polished table, her uniform immaculate, her expression unreadable. Beside her were several high-ranking officers and investigators. Jake and Lyra stood side by side, presenting their evidence. As the files played on the holo-display sabotage plans, intercepted transmissions, payment trails, the room fell silent. When the last file closed, Torres leaned back in her chair. "Real pharmaceuticals will answer for this," the Admiral said, her voice cool but dangerous. "Lieutenant Morrison, Nurse Kethal, you've not only uncovered a conspiracy but prevented a sector-wide health crisis. The Alliance owes you both." Jake exhaled, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. Lyra, however, remained stiff, her fingers curling slightly. She wasn't used to praise. After the debriefing, Torres pulled them aside. "There's one more matter," she said. "Morrison, whatever this serum did to you, it's beyond normal enhancement. Medical Division wants to study it, but only if you consent." Jake hesitated, then glanced at Lyra. Her violet eyes met his, and he saw the fear she tried to hide, the fear that he'd be treated like a weapon, not a person. "I'll agree," Jake said slowly, "but only if Nurse Kethal leads the research team. No one knows this better than she does, and I trust her." Lyra blinked, stunned, but the warmth in her expression was unmistakable. Torres smiled faintly. "Consider it done." Hours later, as the Hippocrates drifted in orbit, Jake and Lyra stood by a viewport, the stars a blur of cold light. The chaos was over, at least for now. But something deeper lingered between them, unspoken but undeniable. "You saved me," Lyra said softly, her fingers brushing his. "Not just from real, from myself. I've been hiding behind protocols, afraid to make mistakes." Jake grinned. "And I'm the best mistake you ever made?" She laughed, the sound like music. "Yes, and maybe the bravest." Jake turned to face her fully. "Lyra, whatever happens next, whatever I'm becoming, I know one thing. I don't want to face it without you." Her gaze softened, and she stepped closer, her hand finding his. "Then you won't have to." The final transmission from real servers arrived an hour later, a desperate attempt to erase all evidence. But it was too late. The Alliance had everything, and Real's empire was crumbling. As Jake and Lyra prepared for their next mission, a quiet understanding passed between them. This was only the beginning. Jake glanced at her, his grin mischievous. "So, Dr. Kethal, what's our next research project?" Lyra smirked, her silver-flecked eyes gleaming. "Figuring out how to keep you from becoming too superhuman." "Good luck with that," he said, pulling her into a kiss that was both a promise and a challenge. Outside, the Hippocrates jumped to hyperspace, stars streaking into blue-white lines, a new journey, a new future, born from the best mistake either of them had ever made.